Wet out there, and there's lots of reports of accidents, and of course with the taxi strike that's happening as well. I know that there are reports as well of some of the highways being blocked, so that's not too good news. So you take care. We'll see you again tomorrow, everybody. God bless you all, and shap shap.
Zimbabwe faces its worst food shortage in 4 years. Tens of thousands have begun receiving food aid.
Finally, some help to stave off hunger for at least another month. Cattle ranching Rishavane is the worst affected.
Trade and Industry Minister Rob Davies says he can confirm that South Africa remains open for business.
The bill will confirm that South Africa remains open to foreign investment.
Petersen is showing his hand in preparation of the Chan tournament in January.
Primetime News, daily at 6 p.m. on SABC News.
This is Newsroom on SABC News. Hello and welcome from a rain-soaked and congested Johannesburg. I'm Ibn Jansen. The show is broadcast live every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. Highlights are rebroadcast at 2 every afternoon and then repeated at 5 a.m. the next morning. We're also streaming live on YouTube every day between 9 and 10 a.m. with the full show available all day on our YouTube channel. Today, well, we look back at the day that set the death of apartheid in motion. We look at road safety in South Africa and some of the solutions, and we'll preview the Joburg Open and talk to one of the top young players in the country. That tournament kicks off at Royal Johannesburg later this week. But first, let's take a look at the news headlines. The political union between the Democratic Alliance and the Gang SA leader Mandela has reportedly ended. Both parties are expected to hold separate press conferences in Johannesburg today. Last Tuesday, DA leader Helen Zille announced that Rampela would be the party's presidential candidate in the upcoming general elections. The National Taxi Alliance has embarked on a national strike today. It cites frustration at government's failure to issue operating licenses. Now taxis exempt from e-tolls are being billed. Many commuters were left stranded this morning and had to use alternative transport. 14 residents of Kutama outside Magado in Limpopo will appear in court today. They handed themselves over to the police yesterday during a meeting between community members and National Police Commissioner Ria Piecha. Piecha urged people not to take the law into their own hands. 24 years ago yesterday, State President F.W. de Klerk delivered the speech that shocked the world and brought an end to apartheid here in South Africa. Shortly thereafter, Nelson Mandela was released from prison and the new South Africa was set on a path to where we are today. Where were you when this happened? Let's just take a look back at this moment in time.
Decided are the following: the prohibition of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party and a number of subsidiary organizations is being rescinded. People serving prison sentences merely because they were members of one of these organizations, or because they committed another offense which was merely an offense because a prohibition of one of the organizations was in force, will be identified and released. Prisoners who have been sentenced for other offences such as murder, terrorism and arson are not affected by this. The media emergency regulations as well as the education emergency regulations are being abolished in their entirety. The security emergency regulations will be amended to still make provision for effective control over visual material pertaining to scenes of unrest. The restrictions in terms of the emergency regulations on 33 organizations are being rescinded. The organizations include the following: the National Education Crisis Committee, South African National Students Congress, United Democratic Front, COSATU, die Blanke Bevrydigingsbeweging van Suid-Afrika. The conditions imposed in terms of the security emergency regulations on 374 people on their release are being rescinded, and the regulations which provide for such conditions are being abolished.
Today, exactly 24 years ago, South Africans woke up to a different reality and almost different country overnight. A day after former President F.W. de Klerk announced his bold and courageous political changes that included the unbanning of the African National Congress and the Communist Party after more than 39 years, and the first unconditional promise to free Nelson Mandela from jail after 27 years. De Klerk's unexpected leap took the breath away of Nobel Peace Laureate Emeritus Archbishop Desmond Tutu at the time, and elated Tutu had expected de Klerk to deliver something, he said, but not quite get the package that was delivered on that day. The move set South Africa on a path that had the world sit up and take notice. Now, in our Cape Town studio, we are joined by Dave Stewart, who leads the F.W. de Klerk Foundation and was a member of Parliament at that time. Good morning, Mr. Stewart. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
Mr. Stewart, tell us, let's just start with the speech. We just played that clip, and I'm sure for you it must be an absolute moment in time. Let's just start with that moment that really shocked the world, and tell us about we heard the murmurs in the House. Just tell us about the reaction in the House, and tell us a little bit about that day, how it unfolded.
Well, even I wasn't a member of Parliament. I was the head of our communication agency on that day. And we had brought all of the international and national media together for a briefing before the delivery of the speech. And we held them sort of in conclave until after the speech. We gave the speech to them, they read it, and I remember Alistair Sparks saying, "Good Lord, he's done it all." So it took everybody by surprise. Nobody expected that the total package would be put on the table in one speech.
And the reaction in the House, we heard lots of murmurs. There seemed to have been a lot of, I would say, unhappiness and probably a little bit of insecurity on the benches at the time as well.
Well, mainly from the right-wing Conservative Party. They were very unhappy, and they grumbled and mumbled quite a lot. I think from the side of the National Party and the Progressive Federal Party at that time, the reaction was, of course, positive.
And the announcement, was it such a big surprise? You mentioned that there was some alluding to it, but Archbishop Desmond Tutu said he expected something, but not quite that much. Was it such a big surprise, or was there an underlying expectation?
No, it was a big surprise. Everybody was expecting something. Most people were thinking about a statement relating to the release of Nelson Mandela. But I don't think anybody expected that de Klerk would put the full package on the table as he did. That took most commentators completely by surprise.
And the response from ordinary South Africans in the hours and days that followed, what was the response on the street?
Well, you know, it was almost dumbfounded. There were sporadic celebrations, but it was almost eerie. This was the beginning of a completely new era in the country's history, and I think everybody was a bit shell-shocked.
There were also reports of lots of people fleeing the country for the swart gevaar, as they call it, that was going to now take over the country. Was there a lot of that going on at the time, or was it over-reported?
I think it wasn't really at that time. I think the uncertainty grew during the negotiations. And there was a lot of trepidation at the time of our first elections, but I don't think so much on the 2nd of February 1990.
Now, can you just, for those people that are watching over the rest of the continent, just take us back to the situation and how bad things really were in South Africa at that moment in time. I don't think a lot of people can think back as far or remember what the situation was really like.
Well, you know, the whole thing was that it had become clear to everybody by the mid-80s that South Africa was on a disastrous course, that the government's policies had failed, that there was no possibility of their succeeding. And so, you know, from the mid-80s, the government started wrestling with this need to take the plunge, to take this huge decision to open our political system to all South Africans. And then toward the end of the 80s, all of the circumstances started going right. The traffic lights turned green. There was a successful implementation of the UN independence plan in Namibia. By the end of the 80s, all of the parties had agreed that there couldn't be an armed solution to the problems of the country. Everybody accepted that there would have to be negotiations. And then, of course, in November 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. And all of these things created a situation where the National Party and President de Klerk felt confident enough to take the steps that he announced on the 2nd of February.
I want to talk about the relationship now. We've seen some pictures of F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela. Recently, F.W. de Klerk said that, you know, later in life, him and Nelson Mandela became quite close. They were very friendly in recent years, and he visited him at the house quite a few times, and they became good friends, really. But that wasn't always the case. Back then, it was very difficult negotiations, weren't it?
Well, you know, they met for the first time in December 1989, and they both sized each other up, and they reached the conclusion that they could do business. But one must remember that they were, after all, the leaders of historically opposing parties, locked in a really critical negotiation process about the future of South Africa. So it's not surprising that they clashed. They clashed several times during the negotiations, quite bitterly. But at the end of the day, whenever the negotiations reached a deadlock, de Klerk and Mandela were able to reach out to one another and remove the obstacles in the way of a negotiated future.
Now, Nelson Mandela is famous for one of his quotes, "Politics is not for sissies," is what he always used to say. What did F.W. de Klerk think of the politician Nelson Mandela?
Well, he had great respect for Nelson Mandela because he was a charismatic leader, very astute, a very powerful personality, and also able to take advantage of situations as they arose. So he had respect for Mandela as a political leader, but he was also Nelson Mandela's principal political opponent. So there was always tension in the relationship.
It wasn't all sort of moonshine and roses after the announcement was made. The years between 1990 and 1994 were very difficult for South Africa. Can you just, for all the viewers watching around the continent, just give people an idea of really how difficult those years were and how difficult it must have been politically for the likes of Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk?
Well, it was very difficult because, to start with, the ANC wasn't ready for negotiations. So we had a whole preparatory period right until December 1991 before formal negotiations actually started at Cadesso 1. And then at Cadesso 1 there was a huge misunderstanding between Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk. Mandela sort of launched a scathing attack on de Klerk, but they managed to patch over the process and continue with the CODESA negotiations. Then in June 1992, there was another enormous crisis when the ANC decided to leave the negotiation process. They decided to opt for rolling mass action. They felt that they would be able to bring about the fall of the government, and that this would mean that it would no longer be necessary to negotiate. And so for a few critical months in 1992, following the Boipatong massacre, South Africa was on the verge of crisis. And this reached a climax with the Bishu incident at the beginning of September. And after that, I think Nelson Mandela reasserted his control over the movement and realized that this was heading for disaster. So he took the initiative in reopening the negotiations. And then, of course, as soon as he did that, the IFP and the right-wing parties jumped off the negotiating train. Yeah. So it was a really difficult process throughout. It was marred by faceless violence. There were a lot of extremists on all sides, including elements in the security forces who didn't want a negotiated settlement and did everything they could to try and block it. And then again in April 1993, we had the assassination of Chris Hani, when once again the country was on the verge of crisis. Fortunately, Nelson Mandela stepped up to the plate. He called for calm, and he was able to defuse the situation. And then finally, we got through to December 1993, when we reached agreement on an interim constitution, and the road was open to our first elections in April 1994.
Mr. Stewart, finally, I wanted to ask you a personal opinion sort of question around 24 years ago, when this whole thing happened. Everyone was stunned. Looking back now, would you have been able to envisage the South Africa we see today? South Africans are always known to complain a lot today. Would you have been able to envisage what we have today?
Eben, I can tell you this. With all of its problems, if somebody on that morning could have transported me to 2014 and showed me what South Africa is like today, I would have said, fantastic, I will settle for that. That looks really great. So we South Africans have no idea of how far we've come in 20 years. We have huge challenges: inequality, education, unemployment. But they're challenges that we can solve as South Africans if we work together. The problems we had in 1985, 1986 seem to have no solution. So, yes, I would say that South Africa 2014 is a much, much, much better place than it was on that morning, 2nd of February, 1990.
Wow, wonderful. That's fantastic to hear, Mr. Stewart. Thank you for joining us today. You say today we have happy problems. Thank you very much. That is the Executive Director of the F.W. de Klerk Foundation, Mr. Dave Stewart, coming to us live from Cape Town, giving us a little insight on that landmark day. Now, the day before Nelson Mandela was released, on the 11th of February, that's a week after this address, F.W. de Klerk was back in Parliament and delivered this landmark address.
The government has taken a firm decision to release Mr. Mandela unconditionally. I am serious about bringing this matter to finality without delay. The government will take a decision soon on the date of his release. Unfortunately, a further short passage of time is unavoidable. Normally, there is a certain passage of time between the decision to release and the actual release of prisoners because of logistical and administrative requirements. In the case of Mr. Mandela, there are factors in the way of his immediate release, of which his personal circumstances and safety are not the least. He has not been an ordinary prisoner for quite some time. Because of that, his case requires particular circumspection.
That was, of course, the day before Nelson Mandela was released in prison 24 years ago, almost to the day now. We were looking back at this a special time in the history of South Africa. But time now for us to get back to today. And this is our top story. The political union between the Democratic Alliance and Agang SA leader Mandela Ramphele has reportedly ended. Both parties are expected to hold separate press conferences in Johannesburg today. Last Tuesday, DA leader Helen Zille announced that Ramphele would be the party's presidential candidate in the upcoming general elections. However, confusion arose on Friday over Ramphele joining the DA. According to a joint statement issued by Ramphele and Zille on Friday, the Agang SA founder would be welcomed into the DA at a press conference in Johannesburg. A message from Ramphele was uploaded onto Agang SA's website, in which she refuted that she would be accepting DA membership. Yesterday, Zille said Ramphele had reneged on the agreement despite the party negotiating in good faith. Moving on, curbing the carnage on our country's roads has become one of the biggest challenges to date. Every year, thousands of lives are lost due to reckless, negligent or drunk driving. The festive season death toll statistics stood at close to 1,500 for the 2013-14 holiday period. It seems that focus always falls on these numbers. But what about the other 11 months of the year? Together with non-profit organisation Justice Project South Africa, we at NewsRoom will every month for the rest of the year look at the situation on the roads. And I can tell you, with the rains this morning, the situation was terrible. Joining us is Howard Dembowski from Justice Project South Africa. He couldn't make it to Johannesburg because of the bad weather and joins us in our Pretoria studio. Good morning, Howard. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad you made it to the studio in Pretoria.
Good morning to you. Yes, I'm also glad I made it. The traffic was absolutely horrendous this morning.
As a nation, we are obsessed with the amount of deaths on the roads during the festive periods. That's a couple of times every year. But just tell us, is there any difference between this period and any other time of the year?
Well, to be very honest with you, if the increased traffic enforcement didn't take place during the periods of Easter and Christmas, I can assure you that we would have a heck of a lot more fatalities and injuries than we usually do, for the pure and simple reason that there's a greater volume of traffic on the roads at those times. But interestingly enough, the most fatal month of the year, if you'd like to actually call it that, the month in which most people are actually killed, is July. And we don't have any increased enforcement at that time of the year. The reasons are probably multiple in that there's change of seasons, etc., etc. But you know, consistently on a monthly basis, we lose a large amount of people on our roads. And we keep on focusing on this story of people dying on our roads. Yeah. But once again, I have to point out the amount of people that actually get injured on our roads exceeds those numbers by 10 times. So where we're talking about 17,000 people dying per year, it's actually 170,000 odd people that are actually affected by this, by being involved in these crashes and either sustaining injuries or dying.
So the economic impact is actually much wider than what we are aware of, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if we have a look at the estimations of 307 billion rand a year, and that's a billion with a B, the fact is that this has a big impact on our economy. If that's the way people want to measure things in money, then yeah, well, then let's do that. You know, the average cost of cleaning up a crash scene goes into tens of thousands, if not more, especially when you have situations where you have to shut down freeways, etc., etc. Yesterday on the R21, there was a collision involving a bakkie. It was a double cab bakkie, and on the back of this double cab bakkie were two passengers. They no longer have their lives now, but that actually shut down the R21 for several hours.
I want to talk about the carnage counter that you guys are putting up for the public to interact with. Just tell us about this and then how the public can interact with this to become more aware.
Yes, well, we believe that road safety is a daily thing, it's an hourly thing, it's a minute thing. You know, to concentrate on it at particular times of the year is absolutely ludicrous, and I would like to actually congratulate SABC for being the first to come forward and have a monthly feature, and we really appreciate that this is happening. But essentially the carnage counter is live on the internet. It can be interfaced with at our website at any given time, and it gives you a pretty accurate count of where we stand at the moment. The fact is that it's been worked out on algorithms that take into account the amount of bodies lying in mortuaries, the amount of people lying in hospitals, etc., and the cost to the economy. So it shows you a good overall picture of where we really do stand right now.
Howard, what's the problem? It seems as if South Africans are very angry and aggressive on the roads in general. Is that the problem?
Well, it's one of multiple problems. I don't think that anybody would be realistic in saying this is the specific problem and, you know, this is how we're going to deal with it. If it was that easy, we could reduce road fatalities down to zero overnight. But unfortunately, South Africa is no different to the rest of the world. And unfortunately, motorists will always drive as badly as they are actually allowed to do so by the authorities. Law enforcement in this country, when it comes to traffic law enforcement, is practically non-existent. People know this. They take chances. They get very aggressive, as you actually so correctly pointed out. They see people behaving badly, and instead of saying to themselves, I'm not going to follow that example, they turn around to themselves and say, well, if you can't beat them, join them. Now, that's an inherent problem in our country, and it's come as a result of insufficient law enforcement. We need to actually take our roads back, to be very honest with you, but it's not going to be achieved by motorists going out and becoming more aggressive, entering into road rage and trying to be the traffic cop themselves. Just remember, if you think that you're a better driver than everybody else, you're not actually alone. You're probably in 100% of the population, because there have been studies that have been conducted in the past where people have been canvassed and asked, do you think you're a better driver than others? And 100% of those people say yes. So obviously there's no terrible drivers on our roads. But the fact is that you can't be a traffic cop. You should never, ever engage in trying to punish another motorist, and that actually causes a heck of a lot of crashes throughout our country because of that aggression that arises from that.
Howard, thank you for joining us today. It's really scary that up to 40 people a day are dying on the roads in South Africa every day. That is Howard Demboski, who is with Justice Project South Africa, just giving us a look at what's happening on the roads and how we can change our behavior. Remember, it's up to you, really. All of us driving in South Africa, it's up to you. You're the reason why the roads are going crazy. Keep it together and be courteous on the road, and we all make it home intact. Let's take a look at what you're saying and thinking on social media. Of course, Cornelius Letabo says, my co-workers thought I was crazy when I lambasted the DA Achang coalition. Look what's happening now. That's, of course, the top story going now. The honeymoon, there was no honeymoon. Temba says, ha ha ha, it all started with a kiss. Like all relationships, now it's ending in tears. Like all failed relationships, DA and Achang relationship. And Tree Fell says, if I was an Achang member, I'd be so hurt. If I was a DA member, I'd be so sad. If I was an ANC member, I'd be laughing so hard. Those are the facts as it stands. Tato the legend. Man calls himself the legend. That's an old story, actually, a legend. Tato, just for the record. DA and Achang couldn't agree on a transfer fee for Mandela. Would have been a good signing. Good one. That's a legendary comment. I'll give you that. Daniel Sorka says, ultimately, the DA returns to being a 25% party, while Rampere returns to a 2% Achang, if that indeed is the case. Bumjive says, both Achang and DA were blindsided by Mampela. Both of them must give her the cold shoulder for her recklessness. And Stormy says, never thought I'd find anything shorter than Kim Kardashian's marriage. You just did. D.A. Achang, she says. Shorter than Kim Kardashian's marriage? That was a whole 72 days. In Hollywood, that is almost a lifetime. Don't forget to keep your views coming at SABC Newsroom. That's where we live. SABC News. .co.za/news. That's where you get all the updates from all around the country all of the time. Well, after the break, we're going to take a look at a landmark case here involving affirmative action in South Africa. No way. This is Newsroom on SABC News.
If you do nothing, you can expect nothing. I'm going to vote because I'm stoked about the opportunities here.
I'm voting for my children's future.
Why? Because I love this country.
I'm voting because I care about what happens.
Yes, of course I'm going to vote, man. I'm excited about the future.
Why? Because South Africa belongs to all of us.
IEC. I vote South Africa.
Why watch the news on SABC? We bring you news in your own language. News that affect you. Sports. We have
Catherine Drew, SABC News at the High Court in London.
Shervin Bryce-News, SABC News.
Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Nairobi.
We touch and change people's lives. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Welcome back. You're with Newsroom here on SABC News. Let's just take a quick look at the stories in the headlines. The political union between the Democratic Alliance and Achangese leader Mandela has reportedly ended. Both parties are expected to hold separate press conferences in Johannesburg today. Last Tuesday, DA leader Helen Zille announced that Rampele would be the party's presidential candidate in the upcoming general elections. The National Taxi Alliance has embarked on a national strike today. It cites frustration and government's failure to issue operating licenses. Now taxis exempt from e-tolls are also being billed. Many commuters were left stranded this morning and had to use alternative transport. And 14 residents of Kutama outside Magado in Limpopo will appear in court today. They handed themselves over to the police yesterday during a meeting between community members and National Police Commissioner Ria Piecha. Piecha urged people not to take the law into their own hands. Trade union Solidarity took the Correctional Services Department to the Labour Court in Cape Town on Friday for disregarding a previous ruling by the same court. The union is fighting the case for 10 Western Cape Correctional Service officials who had been overlooked for promotion because of their race. The court found last October that the department should not only take national demographics into consideration when implementing affirmative action policies. Now, in our Pretoria studio, we are joined by Solidarity's Dirk Groenewald. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Evan. Thank you.
Let's go to Friday quickly. Let's start there. The Labour Court reserved judgment in the affirmative action case involving the Correctional Services employees. Just tell us what's the latest now and how things will proceed this week.
Well, firstly, the reason why we went to court on Friday was due to the fact that end of last year, as soon as we received the judgment, we requested the Department of Correctional Services to indicate whether or not they're going to comply with this judgment. After long debates, they provided us with correspondence in which they indicated that indeed they will comply with the Constitution, the relevant legislation, and the judgment. They will incorporate the judgment. That was after they've advertised 195 positions. After that, they've lodged a cross appeal. So they clearly indicated then that they weren't satisfied with this judgment and they didn't want to take into account the regional demographics. They just wanted to take into account the national demographics, and they was therefore of the view that the judgment was incorrect. We thereafter again requested them to confirm whether or not in the interim period before we go to the Labour Appeal Court, they will adhere to the judgment. They unfortunately failed, and we sent them at the beginning of the year, on the 7th of January, a final letter of demand, and thereafter they said, well, we didn't give an instruction that national demographics should be used, and we also did, there was no instruction to use it and or not to use it. So it was quite unclear what they were busy with. Our indication was quite clear, and the evidence that we've got in the instructions that we got is that in filling this 195 vacant positions, they were going to use the national demographics. And then also there was 194 learnerships positions which they were busy to fill, and they were also going to use the national demographics. When we went to court on Friday, we had a huge debate, and we indicated to the court that there's enough case law that indicates that in the interim time, the judgment of the Labour Court should stand, and that the Department of Correctional Services must comply with that judgment until the Higher Court gives another judgment. Currently, at the hearing, they handed up a number of documents which didn't form part of the court case, and therefore the judge said that they must supply today, supplies with founding affidavit to support that, and on Thursday he will hand down judgment on this issue.
Now, the judge spoke about settlement. You guys should discuss a settlement and come back before the 6th. Have you had any discussions around this with your members firstly, and then also with the Department of Correctional Services? And is there a chance of that?
Definitely, our members and Solidarity, we will sit down and we will discuss settlement. I think at the end of the day, a settlement at this point of time, I think a reasonable settlement would be for the department just to keep all the use of the national demographics in abeyance until the Labour Appeal Court and or the Constitutional Court in the matter of Mrs. Barnard against the SAPS hands down judgment which clarifies this whole issue of affirmative action and how it is to be implemented. So our request and our grounds for settlement would be that the Department of Correctional Services, amongst other, just gives us their undertaking that they will not proceed to fill these vacant positions based on using the national demographic profile only. So we are open for debate, and the possibility is that we will meet tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock with the Department of Correctional Services and discuss this issue and see whether or not we can find possible settlement to this matter.
Mr. Groenewald, just for those viewers watching in other countries around the continent, can you just explain to them the details of this case a little bit, recap it a little bit, and also then your argument?
Well, I think for good reason this court case has been branded the landmark court case for affirmative action. And the reason for that being is that we're dealing here with a specific form of affirmative action. The Department of Correctional Services has made it clear that they want the department and each province to directly reflect the national demographic profile of South Africa. So what they want to achieve in their workplace and in each specific province is a workplace constituting of 79% Africans, 88% must be coloured, 9.3% must be white, and 2.4% Indian. Now these figures they implement not in a nuanced, balanced way. It's an enforced mechanism which they use during shortlistings, during interviews, and it's a harsh and cruel system which they use. Now, from Solidarity's point of view is, firstly, if one looks at the Constitution, you will find that nowhere in Section 9 of our Constitution you will see the word representativity. Nowhere you will find the words absolute representativity. You will find the words that protect and or advance. If you go to Section 195 of our Constitution, which is the core and the heart of our public administration and the values that govern our public administration, you will see there that the Constitution Constitution says that it must be broadly representative based on ability, objectivity and fairness. We say that what the department wants to achieve is definitely not broad representativity, and it's definitely not based on ability, objectivity and fairness. It's a cruel and harsh system, and it amounts to nothing other than social engineering. If you go and look at the Employment Equity Act, the core of the Act, the heart of the Act says what they want to achieve is equitable representation. Equitable, not absolute representativity. If you go and look at the guidelines given by the Employment Equity Act, at the time when the department drafted this plan, they did not comply with these guidelines. They didn't take into consideration the pool of qualified people. They didn't take into consideration the impact, financial impact. So we are of the view that they have dismally failed to comply with the Constitution and the law.
Mr. Groenewald, thank you for that contribution today. That is Dirk Groenewald, who is with the trade union Solidarity, and they've got a landmark case before the courts this week that will affect most affirmative action appointments in the South African workplace. That judgment will be on the 6th of February, and I'm sure everyone in South Africa is looking forward to see what comes out of there. But let's take another look at what you are thinking and talking about on social media. And if needs be, says, happy forced long weekend to everybody who's unable to get to work due to the taxi strike and the rain, I can tell you. Mfundo says a taxi strike and heavy rain equals welcome to GP. Lucky for me, I don't have to be in Pretoria today. Where to? Melvin Causa says today Metro Rail and Gautrain will be rich, I tell you, all because of the Gauteng taxi strike. These places are packed. Tsepo says if the taxi drivers strike in this rain, they deserve to get exempted. Cabello says taxi strike, bus stops packed, and this rain isn't helping either. Happy Monday morning, I tell you. Patandwa says Mandela's Mandela's will to be read today. DA divorces Mandela, taxi drivers to strike. What a Monday in South Africa. Just another Monday morning, my friend. That's all. We keep going in this country. That's where we live, South Africa. That's where we live. At SABC Newsroom. That's where we live. So send us your contributions there. We'll put it on the big screen here, write it up, and make you famous. sabc.co.za/news. That's where you can see all the very latest and very best news updates and, of course, analysis on our website. We're going to take a short commercial break. When we come back, well, one shouldn't say this, but one of the top young black golfers in the country are with us to look ahead to the Joburg Open at Royal Johannesburg later this week. This is Newsroom on SABC News.
Watch the news on SABC. We bring you news in your own language. News that affect you. Sports. We have
Catherine Drew, SABC News at the High Court in London.
Shervin Brightsby's SABC News.
Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Nairobi.
We touch and change people's lives. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Welcome back. You're at Newsroom here on SABC News. 21-year-old Thabo Maseko is a professional golfer who started playing at the tender age of 9 years old. Over the years, he climbed the golfing ladder, and at the age of 20, he obtained a Sunshine Tour card in his first attempt. That was back in 2012. Now he's getting ready to kick off the season right here in Gauteng on Thursday at the Johannesburg Open, or the Joburg Open as it's known. He joins us in studio today. Good morning, Thabo.
Morning. Thanks for having me on the show.
Nice one, brother. Just tell us about this week. With the weather the way it is, you're going to need maybe a wetsuit to play golf this week.
Yeah, I know. It's an unfortunate situation. I mean, the guys have to pre-queue today, so I don't know how they're going to get that done. Yeah. Hopefully the course can dry up by Thursday and we can get things off and running.
South African golf has taken big steps forward in the last 5, 6, 7 years. It must be nice to be a professional golfer, a lot easier to be a professional golfer now in South Africa than it used to be. Yeah,
I'm sure. I mean, everyone, you got the opportunity now. You got the Q school that you can go to. So, I mean, the guys have a full year to get ready for Q school, and there's amateur golf now, and you got IDT as well, and all the mini tours. So there's an opportunity to play competitive golf and sharpen your skills towards Q school.
People don't realize, though, everyone thinks you've got the perfect life and your life is easy now that you're a pro. But it's really tough, and the pressure's really immense to make cuts and to eke out a living as a golfer, really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everyone thinks you turn pro and it's just easy sell in. It actually gets tougher. I mean, the hard work really starts when you get your card, because you're playing against 160, 180 odd players who all can win.
Yeah.
These guys are playing golf for their living. They're paying for their bills and paying to put food on the table. So it's a different situation. It does take a couple of years, to get into it, but hopefully, you just hit the run running.
Yeah, they're easy jobs. They're an easy way to pay for your family, Thabo, than playing golf. But we're just looking at some pictures of, I think it's the Dubai Desert Classic, I think that happened over the weekend. And a lot of these players are actually on planes or getting off planes right now to come to the Joburg Open. It's a really tough field. It's a lot of international players and then all the best players in South Africa as well.
No, exactly. I think all the Europeans will be playing, because I know this year's Ryder Cup. So,
yeah.
The more tournaments they play, the more points. So, it's a good opportunity for everyone this week. Obviously, the top players on the Sunshine Tour as well. The European co-sanctioned events are big for us in our season. Yeah. So, it's a big couple of events we have coming up beginning of the year.
For you, for all the local players, these co-sanctioned events are always very important. It's a place, if you play well, you can make some money. But what are your hopes for this week and then for the rest of the season?
Yeah, the plan is just to get off to a good start. I mean, obviously, every tournament I enter, I plan to win. So I'll set my goals and have a good couple of practice rounds and get my game plan together. And, it's all about executing this week. Obviously, if I get off to a good start this year, it'll be great. But we've got, the next 4 weeks in a row. We've got a long season ahead of us. So yeah. Week by week, I guess.
How do you put a bad week behind you? Or how do you put it if you play badly and you practice well, you're hitting the ball nicely on the range, how do you come into a tournament, play badly, and then immediately move on to the next one with a positive outlook? How can you do that?
Yeah, it's obviously not easy, first tournament of the year, and it doesn't go according to plan. But, you've worked hard, so the more you play and the more tournament golf you play, the better you'll get. At this level, I think the guys can adapt really quickly. So if you've got 4 or 5 weeks in a row,
yeah.
You expect something to happen around the corner if it doesn't happen the first week. So I guess it's just positive mind frame and just trust your game.
Tell us about Thabo Maseko. I see you here with your dad. It's always a similar story, somebody, you've got a dad or family member or uncle who's always supported a young man in order for them to make it. Tell about your history, a little bit of your background, and then the sort of role that your dad played in your career.
Yeah, I grew up in Joburg, going to school at Crawford College. I've always been a sportsman. I used to play soccer. I wanted to be a soccer player, really, until I started playing golf. Went to go watch my dad play at Johannesburg Country Club, where I'm a member, and he got me a set of clubs. Never looked back from there. He plays quite a bit of golf, and I'm fortunate that he took me out there and he taught me all the skills I know today at such a young age. So it's been awesome to have him around him.
Last question. What are your hopes for this week at Joburg Open?
I've set my goals, but I want to win this week. we'll just see what happens at the end of the week.
Well, you've got the talent, you've got the game. We wish you all the best, and we hope that things pan out this week and it don't rain too much.
Thanks, yeah. I hope it doesn't too much, eh?
That's Thabo Maseko, who is one of the top young golfers, and in South Africa we always have to say one of the top young black golfers in South Africa. I don't know why we do that to ourselves. Well, let's take a look at what you are saying and thinking on social media. Of course, don't forget, we are live on YouTube as we speak. You can watch anywhere in the world, in your hotel room. So, Thabo, once you start traveling the European tour, I hope you're going to watch my show on live streaming. Mbali says Mandela's will to be read today. This might be interesting. Might be, my dear. I think it will be very interesting. I think there are a lot of people want to know. Andrew says, so Nelson Mandela's will is to be made public, just like the will of every person who dies in South Africa. How cretinous are the South African media? No, they're cretinous all over the world, my friend. It's not just the South African media. We're always under pressure to get stories done. Why are they publicly reading Mandela's will today? If I won't be inheriting anything, I don't want to hear it. Well, Countess, you just heard what our previous viewers said. Mandela and the rest of Mandela's grandson will only get bursaries on his will. Samuel, I don't know what you're talking about, my friend. Maybe try again tomorrow. Sia says, looking forward to hearing Nelson Mandela's will, like my name might come up by mistake, a.k.a. Foam. I'm sorry, Sia, I don't think that you'll crack the knot there, my friend. Alma Sitoli says, why are they going public with Mandela's will? Do South Africans really need those details? Some might say yes. Some people say yes, we'd be interested. We'd like to see what the father of our nation has in his will. And after all the family shenanigans that went on over the last couple of months, I think there's a legitimate public interest. And in the media, that's our job. That's what we serve. So at SABC Newsroom, that is the Twitter page for this show. Of course, sabcnews.co.za. That is where you can find all the updates all the time from all around the world. You have been watching Newsroom on SABC News. This show is broadcast live every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. from Johannesburg in South Africa. Highlights are rebroadcast at 2 o'clock every afternoon and then repeated at 5 a.m. the next morning. We're also streaming live on YouTube, as I said, every day between 9 and 10 a.m. with the full show available all day on our YouTube channel. You're watching SABC News. This is Newsroom. We love it in the morning.
The multicultural melting pot on the slopes of Devil's Peak in Cape Town was the birthplace of one of South Africa's most talented musicians. Abdul Mutali Petersen, or Taliep as he later became known, spent the early part of his youth in District 6. He was one of 13 children whose love for music and singing was encouraged from an early age. As a young boy, he grew up amongst the minstrels that famously graced the streets of Cape Town every New Year. These traditions played an integral part and planted the seeds for a career that would see him travel the world with his music and songs.
District 6 was really a milestone in our life, especially for him, because that was the time when he started off with the Coens. And yes, it wasn't easy because my father was a very strict man, and yet he saw that Taliep had talent with regards to singing. And obviously it was raw talent at that point in time. And my father saw that there was this gem that he could make something out of. And that is how Taliep started off, by singing.
En hy begin te sing en ek hoor hy sing alright. Te sê vir hom, kyk, die is die song wat ons wil hê jy moet sing. Te sê vir hom, miskans laat hy 3 keer die song oor sing. Hy het oor gesing, hy ken het toe. Nou ja, ons op hartelijk welkom. Toe sê vir hom, "Skan, vat hom daar nie dry, terwyl die klop so nog hulle items doen." Dan dat frikte sy maar aan. En so, toe sy beurt kom toe, wat hy nou sy journaal sang, to win the first prize.
The government of South Africa was starting on the path to apartheid, and Taliep's hometown District 6 became one of its first casualties. As the winds of change blew through the country, District 6 was declared a whites-only area, and the soul of this vibrant community was being ripped apart. The Petersen family, who lived opposite the primary school in District 6, were forced to move to Salt River, an area further out of Cape Town city centre. These early memories lived with Taliep, and it became the basis of many of his later works.
The Taliep had an incredible memory of his childhood, and he was a wonderful storyteller. He was a great raconteur, and he could vividly depict the streets of District 6. And in fact, he took me down to the open piece of ground that was once was District 6, and he walked me through the cobbled streets, you know, that's all that remains there. And he said, "Oh, on this corner was that building, and there, this one lived there, you know, and Buta Saki and Buta Machi and Buta this, and you know, and he walked me through that district, and it was amazing."
District 6 to Taliep was part of him. All the different characters of different people, he actually imbued into his body. That is why he could express himself in the plays.
A friendship developed between David and Taliep, and this in turn gave rise to the creation of District 6 the musical. The show started off slowly, but within a matter of weeks its popularity grew to an unprecedented level.
First production took place at the Baxter in about April of 1987, and it was booked in for 6 weeks, and the first audiences were typically kind of white Baxter audiences of that time. You know, there was no fireworks in the beginning. I think really the audiences were charmed by it. But what we did was we approached soccer clubs and cricket clubs, and we started to sell charities, fundraisers on the Cape Flats, and we got these people in. And when they saw it, toe dit net vlam gevat. I mean, it just exploded. And then that 6-week season had to be extended to 9 weeks, and then it was just a question of trying to find more space, theatre space. And it just kept coming back again and again and again, and became, I mean, it was an enormous success, but not only a success, it was an incredible watershed piece of theatre in terms of the history of Cape theatre. It's because never before had audiences, mixed audiences, come to see a show like this. It was enormous, you know, a very emotional impact.
The Baxter Theatre, one of the finest theatres in our country. I know we have other places, but this is where the thing happens. It was the place where he came and made a stage for himself. He built his international productive career from here. The success was amazing, tremendous, quite unbelievable that a local man by the name of Taliep Petersen and his counterpart David Kramer put up something in this country, in this town, in our city, that would eventually culminate in world recognition.
District 6 the musical broke all South African box office records. It had one of the longest runs in South African theatre history by telling the story of the forced removals through song and dance.
He was a gift of God to the Muslim community of Cape Town, and I think he was in turn our gift to the nation of South Africa. He was able to tell our entire history in music and song. He was able to take what was effectively a subculture and bring its rhythms into the mainstream of every other musical genre in South Africa and across the world. He gave us respectability for something that we did as a side issue. And more importantly, he was able to make us laugh and cry at the history of oppression that our community went through.
Those that knew Taliep knew that he was most comfortable while working. He was a perfectionist whose character came to life in the theatre and studio.
Taliep was a very different person when we worked creatively. He was at his best. He loved the creative process, and he would come to we would work in my studio. I had a piano in my studio, and although Taliep plays the guitar and I play the guitar, when we wrote the musicals, we wrote them on the piano. And Taliep would sit at the piano, and I would lean over the piano with my lyrics and try this and try that, and then chords, you know, and then maybe Taliep would get stuck at the piano, and then he'd pick up the guitar and he'd work out the chord. But he used to love that time. I mean, more than anything else. He liked being involved in the productions and the rehearsals and all the stuff. But the creative time, putting the songs together, he used to always tell me that, hey, this is it. This is what I love doing, you know. And particularly, I mean, if we were working during the fast, he liked that, you know. To be creative during the fast was a highlight in his year. So he had an incredibly warm and exuberant personality, which is what I remember. He also had a temper when I first met him, you know, which he was never proud of. And so, if you got on the wrong side of Taliep, you know, it wasn't a pleasant experience. He could be very hard on people, and God forbid you sing flat, you know. You better sing. You would find nooit sing, you know. So I didn't sing much in his company.